So first off, I want to thank both of you for joining me. I know that we had a lot of emails back and forth kind of discussing the nature of today's discussion. And I just want to start off by, welcoming anyone who's joining us, and also for people who will watch this in the future, we're kicking off the fall series of lectures and conversations for New York Academy of Art. And I'm so happy to have Corina Larkin and Jonathan Ryder with me today. I'll give a very, very brief introduction of both of you. Corina Larkin is a visual artist, writer, and editor. Prior to becoming Q's executive director, she worked at the Brooklyn Rail as a managing editor. She also worked as a management consultant for many years, focusing on new market entry strategies and organizational development in the communications and media industries. Jonathan Ryder is an artist, curator, and writer based in New York City. Ryder is the artistic director at the Flag Art Foundation, where he's worked since 2014 and has organized solo presentations by a number of fantastic artists, including Kamrooz Aram, Ashley Bickerton, Awol Erizku, Genevieve Gaignard, and Sam Gilliam. I'm very happy to have both of you with me today. This is going to be an informative yet informal conversation. I know that both of you have prepared some images that you can share with us. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the questions that I have, I'd love to have each of you. I mean, I've read your bios. There's always a funny thing about reading bios. Like, one, people should have already read your bios. Two,
we're not that interesting. I'm not that interesting. Don,
No. Two, I know that bios often, no matter how in-depth they are, and those are abbreviations, of course, bios often leave out a lot of nuance and important things. So Corina, could you, in your own words, tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do with Q?
Sure. So I grew up in a family of artists. My parents were high school art teachers. I grew up making art every week of my life. And yet, surrounded by artists and, other friends of my parents. And yet when I kind of made life choices at every branch, every fork in the road, I took the path away from art until it became apparent in my mid-30s that you can only stretch a rubber band so far. And I had been studying art in, like undergrad, even in grad school, taking workshops on weekends. And then I stopped working after I had my first child and went back and studied painting full time. And so, even though I have a lot of experience in the business world, I also have a lifelong connection to art and understand what it means to be an artist, having had a studio practice and work for the Rail as an art editor for the art scene section, which is really, their critical reviews section. So I was on the board of Q for a long time, and about 6 years ago, I was asked to take over and run the organization. The organization was at a bit of a transition, and so I've been leading the organization since then. And in some ways, it's kind of the perfect combination of all of my interests, in that I'm using a lot of, kind of analytical skills to run an organization and managerial skills, but it's really all about supporting artists. And, I'd love to, at the right moment in this talk, I'm excited to tell you about what Q does and what, why I feel so strongly about it and how delighted I am to be here to talk about it tonight. So that's me.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that's very, very helpful to sort of frame, the conversation a bit. I mean, I think it's always interesting, and this is the case of both of you. You're both artists working at foundations in different capacities. And I think that informs a lot of your managerial style and your decision making. I'm sure, it'd be very different if you weren't an artist. John, maybe you can do the same, kind of give us a little bit of context.
Yeah, I think similar to Corina, both my parents were educators. My dad was actually the principal of my high school.
Ooh.
I wanted to stop there for a moment.
My parents were at my prom, if that helps anything.
Oh my God.
I could not imagine that for myself. Anyway, go ahead.
Principal and head football coach. So it was a fun experience. No, born and raised in Eastern Pennsylvania, and always was interested in art. Always interested in making art. But my parents were the first generation in their family to go to college and had very practical dreams for their kids, and art was not necessarily one of those things to pursue. So I went to Penn State undergrad, got my degree in English Lit, and studied Egyptology.
That was the compromise degree?
It was the compromise. There was the English allowed kind of, I think, the more academic setting, and then Egyptology was just, a fascinating rabbit hole I fell down. Graduated from Penn State, tried to make sense of how to bring those two things together. Thought I wanted to go into law, start studying UNESCO World Heritage, things that were spirited away. Was bartending, had saved up enough money to actually work with Penn State team on a dig in Egypt, which was one of the best experiences of my life, but was still making art in my hometown at that time. Working in a restaurant, so I was putting together an application, unbeknownst to my parents, to grad school to pursue my MFA. Got into New York and got into Boston. Told them it was primarily a writing degree where I would also still be doing some art. So I came to SVA, and the first week I was here, I got a work study position at Art in General in Tribeca. That led to a fellowship, which turned into a summer job, which turned into a staff in transition, which then turned into the assistant curator, associate curator, and then assistant curator. And then after 4 years working downtown in a vitally important, very scrappy, but artist-centric space, it was time to make a change. And then I've been at Flag for the past 7 years. I've never stopped making my work. I started writing for Art in America about 2 years ago. And I think being an artist and going out and seeing things definitely informs how I work with artists. And it's really my passion to make exhibitions. So that's my overview.
Well, thanks for sharing it. I mean, it's two things that what you said kind of spark questions for me or comments. And one is, I love the fact that both of you have been with your respective organizations around the same amount of time, like 6-7 years. So it's like same arc of like things that have happened in the art world, that have happened in the funding world, that have happened just sort of politically. You've kind of both been at the organizations while all of those things have happened. And man, if the world hasn't changed a lot in 6 or 7 years, I don't know what has. And the other thing I think is interesting is how you describe your, somewhat circuitous route to where you are. And I think for the students who will, watch today's presentation, it's a good reminder that, there are all these steps, right? That it is not just going to be, it's not going to be the way you think it's going to be. Your journey to wherever you're heading is going to have so many detours and twists and turns. And that's generally, the story I hear from, from most people. And just, just to share, 60 seconds on my own journey. If you found Dexter in the mid-90s, the early 90s when I started college, I would have told you I was going to be an attorney. Like that was my thought. I was like, yeah, I'll go to law school and then I'll do this and then do that. And here you go, you fast forward, 25 years later, and I'm, curating exhibitions, a senior critic at New York Academy of Art, and running an online education platform. Like who knows, So Corina, back to Q. Can you explain to people who may not know, like, what is the Q Art Foundation?
Sure. I have got a couple of slides. Should I just screen share and you guys can look at
Sure. No, absolutely.
Pictures of Q artists while I'm talking about Q?
Sure.
Okay, let's see if I have the technical capabilities to do this. Wait, hang on a sec.
No problem. There you go. Perfect. I'm
going to do a slideshow view. That's a little better. How about that? So Q was founded, I keep an eye on the clock so I don't bore you guys. This is just gonna roll. I'm just gonna let it roll while I'm talking. How about that? Q was founded 18 years ago by 3 businessmen. They had some money that they needed to donate for charitable purposes. They also had an interest in the arts. And they contacted Gregory Amanoff, who was the head of the National Academy, and decided to start this organization. And the basic inspiration was that one of the gentleman's wife was an artist, and there were a lot of conversations about how difficult it is to break into the commercial world and to have commercial representation to make a living as an artist. And it became clear, and I'm sure that the students can relate to this, as can John, the people who, that the commercial venues for showing art are not, are overlooking a lot of people. The commercial market is very fickle, and there's a lot of people out there who have been working away in the background and not getting the attention they need. And so Q was founded on the, with the intention of helping these people that are not getting recognized by the commercial market for whatever reason it might be. And there are so many different reasons. Their work is not fashionable. They don't have the temperament to go out and promote themselves. They, women over 50, the least exhibited group of artists, and obviously BIPOC, LGBTQTA populations, people who are doing very experimental work that's hard to sell. All of these people really deserve more opportunities that they're getting. And the other key thing that was part of Q's values is this idea of artists helping artists. So the founders felt that, and still believe that, artists are the ones who know who's worthy of more attention that they're getting. And so we started this nomination system where we would ask a well-known, well-established artist to nominate someone else and then curate their show and mentor them through the process. And we still do that to this day. And it's been, a very satisfying process over the years to watch. And about 7 or 8 years ago, we added an open call to the process, which allows us to balance our exhibition program and allows us to show artists, it gives us access to artists who are in different parts of the country, or maybe completely out of a network, something like that. And so that's how we work now. We have 7 exhibitions a year, 6 solo, 1 group. And that's, it's really the heart of what we do. So, your artists should, students at the Academy definitely want to keep an eye out for our open call. It opens every February. It's, you have to have an artist, a practice of, 3 years, demonstrated consistent art practice, no commercial gallery representation, and no single show, a solo show in New York City in the past 5 years. So that's our very loose definition of underrepresented or underrecognized. And we also do, 2 other types of program. We do a lot of public programming. It started as meeting artists' needs, like teaching students the things that they don't get to learn at art school, taxes for artists, art handling, writing, buffing up on your artist statement, visa issues, whatever it be. And maybe the past 5 years or so, we've started to expand our programming and doing more topical discussions about artists, conversations about topics that artists are very involved in and want to have some community around. So for example, we had a great program on artist activists. We had, artists who were doing political activism, environmental activism, and it's just an opportunity to bring people together around issues. And then the third program that we do is arts education, which is, it's a year-long program for high school teenagers. And we work with students in communities that do not have access to fantastic arts education. And it's part professional development and part studio work. So, you know, John, you might have loved to have this program, because we take the kids all around New York City and introduce them to all the different types of people who have jobs in the art world. So they meet writers, they meet conservators, they meet, you know, people who run nonprofits, people who run art fairs. And so they, you know, they understand how the art world works, and they understand that they can get a job and they can go home and tell their parents, you know, I can make a living doing this. Yeah. And then we give them some studio time. They have, you know, classes with teaching artists, and they develop a theme and they mount a group show. So they learn the experience of how to mount a show, how to promote their work, how to hang their work, how to pack their work, how to write a press release, all of that. And it's a great year-round program, and it's becoming increasingly important to us, given what's happening in our society with the need to diversify and improve equity and access in the visual arts community, that we really think of this program as a pipeline to diversify the arts, you know, the next generation of future artists.
Can you remind me, what's the name of that program and what's the age group?
It's Q Teen Collective, and it's high school juniors and seniors.
Well, that's fantastic. You know, I'm really, really big on financial literacy and professional development. So that's fantastic. I love that. Could have helped John out when he was a kid.
I know. Well, John, I guess you turned out okay. But I mean, it's a very real question, and a lot of, you know, studies show that you're unlikely to pursue a field if you've never met anyone who is in that field. And so, to the extent that we can combat that, even with a small group of kids every year, over time, you know, we hope it makes a difference. And you know, that's always amazing kids that have, you know, come from a huge range of high schools. You know, there's a woman that I'm don't quote me on the name of the high school, but it's like a vocational school for like plumbing and electricity and, you know, the construction trades. And she wanted to become an artist. And, you know, she thought she entered high school thinking she was going to become a plumber, and now she's in art school. So.
Well, I mean, so I do have some questions, Corina, but maybe what I'll do is I'm going to hand it over to John and let him kind of do the same regarding FLAG and just basically give an overview of like, what does the FLAG Foundation do and how does it interact with artists?
Great.
Okay, let me see if I can do full screen on this. This was working before. This computer's a little tricky, I apologize. Let me just start here, as long as everyone can see this.
Sure, go ahead, let's go for it.
No problem. So the FLAG Art Foundation was founded in 2008 by a philanthropist and collector named Glenn Furman, with the very broad mission just to encourage the appreciation of contemporary art among a diverse audience. What that meant in the first years of the foundation was inviting a roster of curators from any different types of perspectives, whether that was from the sports world, whether that was from the museum world, whether that was artists, to look through our founders collection and really put together group exhibitions that were large scale and thematic based. About 5 years in, we started working with artists more on a one-on-one scale, commissioning work and presenting large-scale solo exhibitions of new work produced for view for that show. So I would say the first artist that we worked at that scale was Josée Bienvenu Gallery. Since then, we really operate in terms of, in the spirit of a Kunsthalle. So I would say the majority of work that is on view here at any one time is borrowed from a variety of sources, from artists, collectors, from museums. And what we really try to do is balance out 3 seasons of programming by making sure we're always doing a large-scale thematic group exhibition, that we're working with kind of younger artists in a more integral, interesting way on our 10th floor. We do some historic programming. Google Docs, hopefully it's crashed. Okay, let me get, I apologize. But we're always looking to kind of rewrite the script. I think the idea is that, you know, also as an artist, as a curator, but also there's only 3 full-time staff members of the organization. So we wear many hats at any one given point. So I think the idea for us is that every exhibition is a new way to reinvent what we're doing in-house. So again, we try to program ourselves out about 2.5 years, leaving room in that schedule for the opportunity to take on something that's timely or important that can only be presented now, possibly something that couldn't happen somewhere else. So I'm also going to run through some slides of recent shows, just to show, I think, the wealth of the programming that we do here, and just the monumentally different ways that the artists change the space. The last exhibition that just closed here was a group exhibition called "And I Will Wear You in My Heart of Heart," which was a group show based on figuration and contemporary painting today, with a few examples of textiles. For this, it was 35 artists, ranging from a few artists that had just graduated from grad school, all the way to pieces that were borrowed and are headed to museums. The fun part is about mixing those things together to contextualize the younger artists and the older artists and to bring everyone up at the same time. The fun is also, after 12 years of making exhibitions and lending and having history, we just have a great network of artists and collectors in New York that we can borrow some really spectacular pieces and basically treat everything like it's the same. And what's lovely is the front wall has beautiful work by Taj Russ, who just graduated from Yale, Anthony Kudehi, who's a younger emerging artist, and in the center, and on the left and to the right of him is a beautiful little work by Lysia Scavage. The show was inspired by the show that we had done right before, which was a Nicole Eisenman exhibition. She and her friend Keith Boadwee completely took over the foundation, reinvented it, and created a really beautiful space, but it was all essentially about tenderness. And we took that thread out of that exhibition and turned it into a really beautiful painting exhibition. The next slide is from a show that we had done with Nicholas Party. What you're seeing here is a suite of site-specific pastel murals he had made for the foundation over the course of 4 weeks. We populated that space with pastels dating from 1720, which is a Rosalba Carrera piece that's in the background right now, all the way through 2020, and pieces that were made specifically for the exhibition. It was just a spectacular show, and all of those site-specific murals were destroyed at the end of the exhibition. I like thinking about what we do and the idea of exhibition making as all of this is a temporary container. And it's the charge of the next curator or the next artist to come in here and completely remake the space in their own vision. And Nicholas was just a really spectacular artist that challenged us to go in directions we've never gone before. And I think together we were able to bring out the best of what we can do. I'm incredibly proud of that exhibition. Next slide is a suite of Sam Gilliam watercolors, 12 paintings. It was almost like a cycle of pieces all on washi paper. Such a labor-intensive, beautiful process. Each of the pieces incredibly iridescent, folded. And it was lovely to meet with Sam in his studio, go through the process, and then choose the selection of pieces that would eventually become a flag. My first real curatorial project here was a group show called Dime Store Alchemy, which was based off Joseph Cornell, but Cornell was not included in the show. So it's all about artists who are using boxes, platforms, shelving units, cabinets as a way of quantifying ideas and objects that you wouldn't think twice about, but simply through the course of elevating them in a different way, suddenly the world was changed, and that a marble could be a planet or a sun, or that Tony Fair, these gorgeous bottles to the left could just be this magical constellation on the ceiling. Portia Munson on the right-hand side had taken over an entire room and populated it with, I think, 20 or 30,000 pink objects collected over 25 years. And it became a cabinet of curiosity and a critique of capitalism all on its own. It was such a gorgeous experience to work with her. Ashley Bickerton, this is the first US survey of the artist's work. Ashley, who made himself renowned and kind of infamous in the 80s, we decided to basically go back throughout the career and present 30 years worth of work. It was such an interesting experience to also work with an artist in that kind of intimate way and being on the ground as they're seeing pieces for the first time in decades. And it was quite an emotional, interesting, complicated experience, but again, a really stunning exhibition. The next one is a large-scale group exhibition. And Lena, can I also say, a large-scale thematic group show is my heart. I love putting these exhibitions together. This was called The Times. This was done right after the 2016 election, and we decided to use the New York Times as a jumping off point for artists to really talk about, you know, the current state of the world. So it was 80 artists and artist collectives. We had done an open call for the exhibition as well. So I would say half of the exhibition was taken directly from an open call, which is a ton of work, but was such an amazing experience to work with artists that way. And again, on this wall, you have artists like Felix Gonzalez-Torres, Grand Fury, Richard Prince is in the conversation. I love being able to put these things together. And again, the idea of an exhibition as a temporary container, none of these things will ever be seen together again. And there's something really special to be able to live with artwork in that capacity, in those arrangements for about 3 months at a time. And the next exhibition was a solo presentation by Elmgreen Dragset. This was all based on this was one installation based on those artists interpreting the latest generation of HIV and AIDS medication. So each of these bottles, urns, which is hand-blown glass, is filled with a pigment that corresponds to a color on any number of pills. They're designed to be taken in different dosages, which corresponds to different sizes, different arrangements of the different dosages. But it was a beautiful space that, again, we completely remade the architecture. And then I just wanted to end with a funny one, which obviously the picture says it can't be displayed, but it was a Jeff Koons, Charles Ray, and Cecily Brown installation, which was a beautiful show, but was the most complicated installation of my entire life. I just kind of like going through these different types of exhibitions to show the range of the work. Every exhibition, as I was saying before, is a complete new universe. It's a complete new experience of learning how to install, how to write, how to think about the space, how to think about working with artists. And I mean, the unique perspective that Flag has just really allows us to sometimes go to the ends of the world for an artist and see how we can make really amazing things happen together. We can
Thank you.
Again too.
Thank you.
I think one thing that Q and Flag share is this variety in terms of the work that we show. That, you know, is it fair to say that you don't have one particular curatorial point of view that you're advocating for? You're really actively trying to vary the perspectives and the type of work that you show.
Yeah, I think it's like when we invite artists in, or when we invite curators in, I think the idea is, how do we work together to really execute someone's vision in a genuine way? And I think we want to become the scaffolding and support structure around someone to really go the distance and challenge themselves, challenge us. I like the idea of, you know, operating from a space of yes until you have to say no, which can be conceptually, can be financially, can be just physical installations. But there's always kind of a wonderful challenge when you open an exhibition that, you know, maybe gave some gray hairs, or you had to kind of rethink the model. It's amazing to, you know, not to finish that sentence, but I always gauge the success of a project as if my artists or the curators walk away happy. If that's the case, I've done my job. Everyone else is kind of secondary on that list. So it's really in service with the artist, and it's really about asking them to, continually ask us to rethink how we do things here.
Thanks for sharing that. And so a question I have for both of you. And Corina, you touched on this as well in terms of how artists can engage with Q, and John, I'd like to come back to you on this as well, like how artists can engage with Flag. So in the example you gave, Corina, there was a nomination process that has also kind of dovetailed into an application process, right?
Yeah, they're two separate tracks. The nomination process, we invite a curator to select someone, but the open call, anybody can apply. And it's really just the question of whether they meet the criteria that we have defined for, under-recognized. If you've got a commercial gallery, even in another city, it's not, we're not the best, it's not the best use of our resources to work with you.
Right, I understand that. And so with that said, someone applies and then they are accepted. In addition to the exhibition, what else comes along with an artist working with Q? You mentioned professional development in the context of other things that Q is doing. Do you offer that to the artists who are exhibiting at the space? Like, what else is involved other than say?
I related to what John was saying about trying to kind of cater the experience to the artist and provide an environment that allows the artist to stretch themselves and that there is a creative process involved in mounting an exhibit, right? And so we don't have the resources that the Flag does, but we do the best we can. We are wage certified. We pay the artist an honorarium. Everybody, the curators are also paid, and it's a very regardless of whether you're nominated or you're selected through the open call, like the experience is very personal based on the relationship between the curator and the artist. And there's going to be a studio visit, there's going to be conversations, there's some planning of the exhibit, and there's help installing. But it really depends on where the artist is in their career and what they need too. And so that's something that that we encourage the curator to kind of discuss with the artist and try to understand where that artist is at that moment in time and move them along. And there's the logistical support that we supply, the financial resources, albeit, as I said, definitely not what the Flag has to offer, but we don't want our artists to go into debt to mount a show at Q. We try to support them in that way. So,
and I'd like to spend a moment on that concept a bit, Corina, because I think that there's a lot of there are a lot of misconceptions, at least it's been my experience talking with artists, about what they can and can't expect from a relationship, not just with the foundation, but even with the gallery. I mean, oftentimes I hear of artists pursuing an exhibition opportunity, but they're getting, basically no financial support from the gallery or the organization that's asking them to do it. So in effect, like you said, they're kind of going into debt to show their work, which doesn't really fundamentally make much sense when you think about who's actually benefiting from the presentation. It is the artist, of course, but it's also the organization or the gallery.
And the audience and
the audience as well, right? So there should be some sort of equitable arrangement around those things, even when the artist wants to do something that is, quote unquote, ambitious. You also mentioned that Q is wage certified. So that's something I'm familiar with, but can you share what that actually means?
Sure. Don't quote me. Don't ask me to tell you what wage, WAGE, stands for, but it's basically a nonprofit organization that sets standards. The basic idea is that artistic labor is labor, deserves to be compensated. And, this idea of like oh, you know, hang your painting in my gallery and something might come out of it, is outdated and unfair to artists, or, you know, come and talk on this panel and something might come out of it. We believe that if someone, you know, if we ask someone to give an artist talk, they should be compensated for that time. If we ask an artist to mentor an artist, they should be compensated for that time. And you know, there is a place for the commercial model, but there are also, you know, many contexts in which, you know, it's important to recognize that artistic labor is labor. And so wage sets standards for what people should be paid. And we went through a process over several years to document that we meet those standards. And that's basically it. And it's a great, you know, it's a great resource for your students to, you know, go on Wage's website. And, you know, if someone asks you to write something, check out what it, you know, what the standard guidelines are on Wage. If someone asks you to speak, you know, go to the websites, check out the guidelines. You know, if you feel uncomfortable advocating for yourself, you've got the information on this organization's website, or, you know, the staff there, or whatever it is, the publications that they put out to back you up and say, you know, give you the language and the confidence, or whatever it is that you need to say, I deserve this pay for this, you know, activity.
No, that makes total sense. And John, in your description of how FLAG functions, it seems, if I'm reading this correctly, so it's, you know, you're working with curators who then bring in the artist. Is that an accurate assessment?
What we'll do often, again, we're a very small team. So I think the idea is when we start working with someone, it's about how generally working together. So we will help shape unless someone comes to us with a fully formed concept. I think the idea is I think we like the idea of working collaboratively with someone, unless you know, unless it's a traveling exhibition and has certain parameters to it. Or unless something comes in that's very specific. And in all of, you know, in all 7 years when we've worked with an outside curator, at least on, you know, from my perspective, it's always been a conversation where there's always been a happy medium of advocating for other artists that they should be looking at, or how we could be thinking about things differently. So just in my own experience, it's been more of a navigation per individual exhibition.
And thanks for sharing that Wage link, Corina. So John, really for both of you, as I mentioned, what I think is interesting is that you've both been at your respective organizations for right around the same time, 6-7 years. And so can you just share, you know, maybe you know, it could even be anecdotal, like what has that arc of time been like working with artists and curators? I mean, we've gone through different presidential cycles. We obviously the past year and a half going on 2 years with this pandemic. How's your organization sort of navigated it's a big question, like the political climate and then also the health crisis, you know, simple question.
You go, John.
It's been complicated. I think COVID has brought out different types of stressors that, you know, before we wouldn't have understood. In March of 2020, when New York essentially went into lockdown, we closed. Luckily, we were in between exhibitions, so we didn't have to automatically, basically, I'll just do an emergency deinstall. And it took us 6 months, probably until the beginning of September, where we were doing a project with a LA-based photographer named Awol Erizku. That project was supposed to happen in May, and then we pushed it, and it was supposed to happen in August, and then we pushed it, and then we finally got to a point where September opened up, and it felt comfortable to finally do an exhibition, not knowing if you were going to, you know, spend a few weeks installing something, if it was going to be only open for 6 days, and we were going to go back into lockdown again, or if it was going to be open for 6 months. Also logistics had changed completely as well. Certain services, certain people that we had worked with beforehand were no longer available, or certain companies were out of business. Anecdotally, we were going to black out the space. It was going to be a much more dramatic environment, and I had this beautiful idea. Had it been pulled off, would have been great. But we have windows on both sides of the gallery space, and I had found a foam that if you cut it and you put it in the window, it created this beautiful blackout type situation. I didn't realize in the course of doing that that it would also create a superheated space in between the foam and the window, and one of the glass panels shattered. And it took about 8 months for that to be fixed because small companies weren't doing small jobs anymore. We had to get a neon fixed from Hong Kong, and that wasn't able to be happened. We had to do fixes in New York. You were beginning to install remotely with artists as well. And it became a different type of navigation, which again, trying to create a support system where the artist walks away happy. Normally when they're in space, then they can control certain details and go over lighting and basically do, you know, the soup to nuts of what makes an exhibition, including press releases in terms of, you know, wording, didactics, all of those things. It became a much more complicated process to do everything remotely, or have to make exhibitions that normally would happen at a certain time for a certain price. All of those things had to exponentially change. So it was a process of working with artists in different ways, which the next exhibition after that was with Nicole, Eisenman, and Keith Boadwee. Nicole, again, didn't feel comfortable navigating New York, so we had to do that remotely with her. And also Keith, who was based in San Francisco, again, that was one of those projects that you had to do completely over Zoom. And there were a lot of there were 300 pieces, 300 drawings in Keith's exhibition that we had to install remotely. And ultimately it had to be about, you know, having a curatorial conversation, but also having, basically just trying to establish trust. We're working with an artist in Paris right now on the Suzanne Duguid Flag Art Foundation Prize, which we operate, which will happen next fall, which will completely reimagine how we operate in space. And we'll completely collaborate with communities in different ways. But all of that's going to have to be done virtually, or we'll have to be working with the State Department to get, you know, visas for artists to come. So, I mean, the pandemic has just fundamentally changed how we operate. And I would also go back to, it was not only about when we opened in September, about getting that show off the ground, then suddenly you're a public space again. And it was about working, you know, with a small team. We work out in the public, we don't have closed off offices. And what it meant to then navigate viewers coming into space, having them check in through either a QR code or sign contract tracing forms. Some people don't want to sign contract tracing forms, what it means to kind of advocate, or what it means to ask people to leave. Or when the mask mandate came down and we maintained masks in space, it became a completely different navigation with audiences coming into space. And ultimately, you know, having gone from a very small quarantine pod of friends and family to, you know, a Saturday in September where 100 people are coming through the space, it became a really complicated navigation of working in service of the artists and wanting to kind of, you know, keep the light on and maintain a beacon and be open and share what we do with the world, but also just the realities of, you know, this was pre-vaccine, so it just became mitigated risks in terms of, you know, touch points had to be wiped off every hour, and just making sure with staff and people that everyone felt comfortable in the space. So just everything became exponentially complicated. I'm still proud of, in that time, being able to have pulled off really amazing things for artists that I love and support. And, you know, knock on wood, we were all healthy and did the best that we could, but it's been complicated. It's been extremely complicated.
I can understand that. And Corina, what's the journey been like at Q?
Very similar. Absolutely. Complicated, stressful, you know, difficult to keep everybody healthy. But I think, you know, with regard, we closed from March to September, and actually our initial focus was just maintaining the commitments that we had to artists for the rest of that calendar year. And, you know, we'd already, you know, people have been working on shows, and we made the promise, and we were pretty determined to make that happen. And there was some juggling of schedules, shortening of shows, you know, pairing days off here and there. And postponing shows, but we were able to meet all our commitments. And that was, really important to us. And, the staff did an amazing job. And I think the one thing that really amazed me was, frankly, I just didn't think we were going to get people coming, and yet people did come. And it was really heartening, and they're coming to this day. And I think it's, a testament to our artists, but also it's a testament to, the power of art and the power of our community, is that, this is what motivates, like seeing art, being in the room of the art, talking about art is a very powerful experience. And it, even in like amidst all of this chaos, people are really driven by that need. And so that's just, that kind of keeps you going, right? When you see someone coming through the door and they're like, wow, this is great. I don't think we'll ever take that for granted again. And I'm sure that, John feels the same way. Like,
I mean, ultimately seeing art in person and making exhibitions, I mean, at the end of the day, I believe in a brick and mortar exhibition space. I believe in an exhibition as a means of telling stories. And we did an initiative. It was interesting. It was as soon as we closed down for COVID, as most institutions did, we looked at the digital space, and we looked at how can we continue to engage, and how can we continue to think, and how can we continue to extend the mission of what we do physically in space, outside. And so we had started this series of Instagram-based exhibitions, and to think about the format of Instagram being like, there's no parameters. As long as something exists in image, let's put it together. So it was I started to invite, I think, 24 curators, artists, people that I just had either seen or liked or was following, and said, would you consider creating an impossible exhibition, one that physically couldn't happen in space? And would you think about doing that, in the format of 10 slides and for images? And what I thought would initially be a very kind of interesting and nimble and fairly quick process turned into the same, care and commitment that we put into the physical exhibitions suddenly went into these shows where I was doing image permissions. We were going back and forth with texts. We were just making sure that it was archived well. And I mean, it was a way to keep engaged. And I love each one of those projects because they physically couldn't happen. I loved using the parameters of a space that's completely imaginary to think outside the box. But at the end of the day, I think getting back into the office and making exhibitions and seeing people come through the door, and again, being heartened by, I think 2 Thursdays ago was, I feel like the opening, the fall opening started, and going back on the streets and seeing people out and enjoying, and also feeling a little wary about how many people were out and enjoying. But it's exciting to see that energy come back, and I agree with Corina, people never stopped coming. So
yeah.
I think, even if that was maybe 2 or 3 people on a weekday and maybe more on the weekend, it was incredibly gratifying for me, my colleagues, and our artists to see that people were coming through and engaged and interested and wanted to know more.
John, I'm curious if you had the same experience as us with regards to the digital programming. Is it we found that we were able to reach new audiences outside of New York City, and
Absolutely.
people were logging on from all over the country, and that was really a wonderful byproduct of that. And now we're trying to think, how do we, maintain that? How do we continue to reach people outside of the city?
No, it was an amazing opportunity. It was also, I started just reaching out to an international group of curators too. So it was also fun to start working for time zones ahead. I think the misnomer for social media for so many organizations, not if you do it or you work for it, but I think outside of it, it all takes time. I think to maintain those initiatives, to make sure that they mirror the quality of the work that you do in person. It really takes a lot of time and effort to do those things, but when they can be done successfully and when you bring in new audiences into the fold, obviously it's something to kind of continue. I think the art world for so many years has been trying to push towards the digital in sometimes meaningful and not so meaningful ways, and this was a moment where suddenly everyone was going digital.
Right, and it was definitely a learning curve and an experimentation. And I think you're right that we're still trying to figure out how video remote conversations, what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that point, I think that it's been sort of like a cycle, almost like the same cycle of grief, right? But I'm just using it as a comparable, right? You know, there's like denial, then acceptance, then, you know, anger. I'm doing it out of order, but you get my point. There's that cycle.
Sure.
And Zoom sort of had that same cycle, right? There was like, aha, there's this thing, it's fantastic. And it's like, but it's every day and it's all day and it's too much. Pull back, but we need it. You know, it's like this going through this cycle of how to interact. And Zoom is obviously one of many platforms, and Instagram's another that people were engaging with. And I recall just so you know, like I'm in Japan right now, and I live here now. I was in Japan at the beginning of the pandemic. My family, we flew to Japan on March 1st of last year, and we were supposed to be here for 4 weeks, and we ended up being here for 3 months because we couldn't leave. We were not stranded. My wife's Japanese. We're with family. It's fine, but we couldn't get a flight back. And so everything within that 3-month period, to your point, I was doing online. And it was almost like, although it was a scary time, it was also very exciting, and it felt like novel and fresh. You know, I was doing these like IG live talks with people. I would get up at 5 a.m. local time and go down to the water and have my phone. And then after a while, you realize, well, this is actually a lot of work. Like, it's not as if it's just easier because you're not commuting. No, it's just like a lot of work because it never ends, right? And so for art, and sort of like it never ends. So for artists to kind of like bring it back to artists and even curators, I think one of the things that I noticed is there was a certain amount of like fatigue and burnout around using technology, because it's sort of like, am I doing enough? Because when I look at Instagram, everyone's doing so much. Or when I look at, you know, what's being like pushed out through newsletters, it seems like every artist or every museum has all these digital things going on. And I think it kind of built up a lot of anxiety, at least for a few of the artists I know, as to whether or not like that was a time for a sort of introspection and spending time in their studio doing the work, or was that a time to just do a tremendous amount of outreach because everyone was sort of like open to these new technologies? And that's not so much a question, it's just more of an observation. And I think now, we're still early days around how these technologies are helping artists and organizations interact with the world. But I do believe there's a clear desire, to Corina's point, there's a clear desire to maintain this momentum, particularly as it relates to sort of a more national or international reach. I think that people are now realizing what was pretty obvious before this pandemic, so there's a big world out there, right? And you should just like welcome those kinds of like more international and global interactions. Even if you're an artist without a gallery in your space, you have these tools available to you and you should use them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our discussion here. I want to just thank you both for your time today, sharing information about you know, Flag and Q. And I know that people could go online and sort of see what you have going on. But as a closing, could you just tell us like what's on view and what's coming up? And we'll start with you, John.
So we're working with an artist named Cynthia Sampson, who's based in South Africa, and just the way that the production schedule has gone and the way the transport has gone, we're not opening until the middle of October. So we will open October 16th, which is a Saturday. So please, everyone, feel free. So on the 9th floor, we'll have a beautiful suite of 20+ paintings that are. The mood shift is all about kind of violence and both being inevitable and around every corner. So the show is thematically dark, the color palettes in shades of blood. It's going to be a very dramatic, but I think there's a lot of beauty in the exhibition to be found. So I'm excited to see those works in person. On the 10th floor, I'm organizing a very poetic little group exhibition, which is called In Search of the Miraculous. Which is all about artworks that are essentially asking you to believe in them to be able to complete whatever happens in the space. The show is based off of Bastian Adler's Last, performance piece, Dutch performance artist, disappeared in the 80s on a transatlantic small boat. But it's a beautiful show about alchemy and doppelgangers and not being able to trust what your eye is seeing, but being told a story and then falling in love with something. There's what I would compare it to is there's a beautiful little sculpture by Jason Dodge, which is a taxidermied owl that only through the didactics that you know that it's stuffed with a ruby and a tourmaline, but you have to believe that it's done. So the whole show is about asking you to believe in a really poetic assortment of artists and objects.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Corina, how about Q?
Sure. We have a show by James Morrell, who is a Philadelphia-based artist, an African-American artist. He was nominated by Odile Donald Odita, who's also Philadelphia-based, and it's a wonderful show. James is a lovely, very person who's done a lot of things. He was a DJ. He comes from a family of plumbers and construction workers and architects, and he has done a lot of video work, and then he started working in wood sculptures, and the much more kind of hands-on, labor intensive. And so the show that we have now is a group of sculptures that he's done primarily in wood, and through those sculptures he's engaging in African-American history, but he's also responding to the materials and connecting different images, kind of his internal thought process and the reaction to the materials, and people in African-American history that were important to him. So that it's a fantastic show, really beautiful and poetic. And that's up until the end of October. And then we have a performance artist named Danielle Deadweiler, who's curated by Tiona. I'm sorry, I'm going to get her last name wrong. We just call her Tiona. Tiona McLaughlin, something. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. And that's going to be drawings and video installation. And Danielle is a dancer and an actress, and I think it's going to be quite unusual. But we're still kind of, it's coming in November, so I'm not in a position to say any more than that. But and then in January we have Gulnar Adili, who is based in Brooklyn but is of Iranian descent, and she deals with the female body and Islam, and I think that will also be a wonderful show.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We've come to the end of our discussion. I want to remind folks that next week on September 29th, I'll be in conversation with artist Honor Titus. I'm really looking forward to that. John and Corina, thank you for your generosity today. I learned a lot about both of your organizations. The good news for me is that I'll be back in New York in mid-October, so I'm going to come and visit both of you.
Please do. Please do.
I will definitely come visit both of you and see what you have going on. And again, I really appreciate your time. I want to wish you both a great evening and continued health and safety. And thank you.
Thank you for including us. And John, nice to meet you.
Yeah, and I'll stop by the foundation this week.
I'd love to see you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good night, both of you.
Thank you, everyone.